If you walk through Pioneer Square today and glance down at the sidewalk beneath your feet, you'll notice something unusual: small, thick glass blocks or prisms set into the concrete. These are called vault lights. Installed mostly in the 1890s, they were designed to let daylight filter down into the shadowy spaces 1 story below street level. That lower level is the original Seattle, the city that existed before the Great Fire of 1889 forced a dramatic transformation. That older version still exists down there, sealed off, dark, damp, and almost entirely forgotten by the people who walk overhead every single day. Seattle is far from unique in this regard. Across the United States, countless American cities contain hidden layers, networks of abandoned tunnels, unfinished or disused subway systems, forgotten utility passages, and buried commercial districts. Millions of people pass above them daily without ever suspecting what lies just a few feet beneath the pavement. I didn't begin this research looking for lost underground cities. My original focus was more conventional, urban infrastructure during America's industrial boom. I wanted to understand the massive technological and spatial shifts that took place between the late 19th century and the mid-20th. How we moved from horse-drawn carriages, streetcars, and early electric railways to the dominance of automobiles and sprawling highways in less than 100 years. It was standard historical scholarship. But along the way, I stumbled across photographs that changed the direction of my inquiry. Old black and white images showed Seattle's underground passages still lined with 19th-century storefronts, glass windows, signs, even door frames, perfectly preserved in darkness. I found pictures of Cincinnati's never-used subway stations, clean platforms, tiled walls, electric lights waiting for commuters who never arrived. There were maps and photos of tunnel networks beneath downtown Los Angeles that virtually no modern Angelino knows about. A pattern started to emerge, one I couldn't ignore any longer. American cities have repeatedly constructed new versions of themselves directly on top of the old ones. What we experience on the surface is only the most recent chapter. Beneath it lie earlier chapters, sealed away like time capsules no one opens, layers of forgotten urban history stacked vertically instead of spread horizontally across time. Let's begin with Seattle because its story is perhaps the most visually and conceptually dramatic. On the afternoon of June 6, 1889, around 2:30 p.m., a young cabinetmaker's apprentice working in a furniture shop at the corner of Front Street, today's First Avenue, and Madison Street accidentally knocked over a pot of heating glue on a wood-burning stove. The flammable glue ignited dry wood shavings and sawdust scattered across the floor. Flames spread with terrifying speed. Within minutes the building was fully engulfed. The fire jumped to a neighboring liquor store, whose alcohol-fueled explosion sent burning debris flying. 2 nearby saloons suffered the same fate: more explosions. The city's fire chief was conveniently out of town that day. Volunteer firefighters, in their eagerness, connected too many hoses to the same water mains, collapsing the pressure almost to zero. By dawn on June 7, between 25 and 30 city blocks, essentially the entire commercial heart of Seattle, had been reduced to smoking rubble. Property losses were estimated at around $20 million, an astronomical figure for 1889. Here the story takes its strange turn. Instead of simply clearing the debris and rebuilding at the same grade level, city leaders made a radical decision within days of the fire. They would raise the street level of the entire commercial district by anywhere from 10 to 35 feet, depending on the block. The official justification was entirely practical. Seattle had been built on low-lying tidal flats at the edge of Elliott Bay. Twice daily high tides regularly flooded basements and streets. Sewage flowed sluggishly or backed up because the natural slope was almost non-existent. Elevating the streets would allow proper drainage, modern plumbing, and protection from flooding once and for all. Rebuilding began almost immediately, without waiting for the massive regrading project to finish. Property owners, sensing an economic boom on the horizon, constructed new 4- and 5-story brick buildings right on the old, low ground where their burned structures had stood. They knew full well that once the new streets were completed 1 or 2 stories higher, their current ground floors would become basements or sub-basements. Still they built. For nearly a decade, Seattle existed in a bizarre architectural limbo. New sidewalks and roadways hovered above the original storefronts. Pedestrians had to descend ladders or wooden staircases to enter shops at the old level. Later, the city constructed permanent brick-arched sidewalks that bridged the gap, creating long, hollow passageways, some reaching 35 feet in height, between the sunken original city and the new one above. By the mid-1890s the regrading was largely complete. Merchants moved their businesses up to the new street level. The original ground floor spaces, once bustling with shops, restaurants, and offices, were abandoned. To keep those lower spaces from becoming pitch-black voids, the city embedded hundreds of vault lights in the new sidewalks. For a short time, people continued to use the underground passages for storage, shortcuts, and even some businesses. But in 1907, following 3 confirmed deaths from bubonic plague, carried by rats, city officials condemned the entire underground district. With the Alaska Yukon Pacific Exposition scheduled for 1909, they wanted to present a clean, modern image of Seattle to the world. The passages were officially closed, boarded up, and in many places filled or sealed. An entire layer of the city was erased from everyday life, literally paved over. The underground didn't remain empty for long. During the Prohibition era, 1920 to 1933, the abandoned spaces became ideal for illegal activity. Speakeasies, opium dens, underground gambling rooms, and cheap flop houses for the homeless and transient. What had once been legitimate commercial frontage now hosted a parallel shadow economy, thriving precisely because the authorities had declared the area off-limits and dangerous. It wasn't until 1965 that local historian Bill Spidell began offering paid guided tours of a small, stabilized portion of the underground. Even today, only a fraction is accessible to the public. The vast majority remains sealed, slowly deteriorating in perpetual darkness beneath the busy streets above. The standard historical explanation presents this as sensible, forward-thinking urban planning. A disaster provided the perfect opportunity to correct long-standing environmental and sanitary problems. Perhaps that's all it really was. Yet something about the speed and decisiveness of the choice troubles me. The willingness to simply bury an entire commercial district rather than rebuild at the original level. The fact that for almost 2 decades the city openly functioned as 2 separate vertical layers, one abandoned below, one thriving above, before the lower one was condemned and forgotten. Once you become aware of it, you can't walk through Pioneer Square the same way again. You realize you're treading directly on top of another city, one that most people have no idea exists. Portland offers a different underground narrative, one deeply tangled in legend, tourism, and historical dispute. The tunnels, or connected basement passages, beneath Portland's Old Town and Chinatown are real. That much is undisputed. What actually occurred in them is where the story becomes complicated and controversial. Between roughly 1850 and the early 1900s, Portland developed a notorious reputation as one of the most dangerous and lawless port cities on the West Coast. Ships from Asia, Europe, and the Pacific arrived regularly. Exhausted sailors often deserted rather than sign on for another grueling voyage. Ship captains, desperate for crew, paid crimps, middlemen, to supply replacement men, by any means necessary. The practice became known as Shanghaiing after the Chinese port city. Victims, usually drunk, drugged, or knocked unconscious, would wake up already at sea, forced to work as crew or face starvation or violence. Local legend claims an elaborate network of underground tunnels made Shanghaiing easier and more efficient. Supposedly, trapdoors and saloon floors dropped unsuspecting men directly into passages that led straight to the waterfront. Holding cells carved into tunnel walls allegedly held kidnapped men and women, the latter sold into forced prostitution. The entire operation ran beneath the streets, invisible to ordinary citizens above. But here honesty is required. The evidence for this elaborate underground kidnapping network is extremely thin. The Oregon Historical Society and several academic historians have stated clearly that no primary documents substantiate a widespread tunnel system used specifically for Shanghaiing. The waterfront seawall wasn't constructed until 1929. Before that, any low-level tunnels would have flooded twice daily with the tides and during Portland's heavy rainy season. The earliest published claims directly linking the tunnels to Shanghaiing date only to the 1970s, when tour guide Michael P. Jones began popularizing the dramatic stories to attract visitors. Shanghaiing did happen in Portland. Court records, newspaper accounts, and sailor testimonies confirm it, but it almost certainly occurred above ground. In bars, boarding houses, back alleys, and on the streets. Victims were drugged, beaten, or tricked, then carried or dragged to waiting ships. The underground tunnels, mostly interconnected basements and short service passages, were likely used for more mundane purposes. Moving goods out of the rain, storing inventory, running opium dens, smuggling alcohol during Prohibition, and allowing discreet movement between buildings. The tunnels exist. Something happened down there. Yet official historical accounts often work hard to separate the physical passages from the documented criminal activity of the era. The pattern repeats. Yes, tunnels are real. No, they weren't used for that. Yes, crime flourished. No, not in the way popular legend claims. The effect is to turn something concrete and visitable into something vague, romanticized, and ultimately dismissible, making people question even the tangible evidence beneath their feet. Cincinnati presents perhaps the strangest and most melancholy underground story of all, not because something was deliberately hidden, but because something magnificent was built and then abandoned in plain sight. In 1916, Cincinnati voters overwhelmingly approved a $6 million bond issue, more than 80% in favor, to construct a modern rapid transit subway system. The planned 16-mile loop would connect downtown to neighborhoods including Over the Rhine, Norwood, and Oakley, finally placing Cincinnati among America's elite transit cities like New York, Boston, and Philadelphia. The route cleverly reused the abandoned right-of-way of the old Miami and Erie Canal, which had become obsolete and stagnant by the early 20th century. Building in a pre-existing canal bed was far cheaper and easier than tunneling through solid bedrock. Construction began on January 28, 1920. By 1923, workers had completed more than 2 miles of twin tunnels beneath what would become Central Parkway, along with 4 fully finished underground stations, platforms tiled, lighting installed, ready for passengers. 3 above-ground stations were also built along the route. Then everything stopped. Not because of structural failure, not because of technical problems, not because the public rejected the idea. The project died from a lethal combination of post-World War I inflation, political vendettas, and shifting priorities. Construction costs had skyrocketed. The original $6 million was nowhere near enough. Estimates suggested another $10 to $12 million would be required. A new mayor, Murray Seasongood, campaigned partly on killing the subway project, viewing it as the pet initiative of his predecessor. Negotiations with neighboring municipalities dragged on. The 1929 stock market crash delivered the final blow. On October 1, 1928, Central Parkway, a wide boulevard, opened directly on top of the unfinished subway tunnels. A week-long celebration marked the event. Beneath the new roadway, however, the tunnels and stations sat silent and empty. Platforms built to welcome thousands of daily riders received no one. Today, Cincinnati possesses the largest abandoned subway system in the United States. The tunnels remain structurally sound. One station was converted into a Cold War-era nuclear bomb shelter complete with ventilation, sanitation, and water systems. In the 1950s, a 52-inch water main was routed through part of the tunnel network because it was cheaper than digging a new trench. The city continues to maintain the tunnels, not for transit, but to provide structural support for Central Parkway above. Recent engineering assessments confirm the tunnels could remain viable for another century or more. Yet the estimated cost to complete and operate even a partial system now exceeds $100 million, while filling them with dirt would cost around $19 million. So they sit, empty, dark, and perfectly preserved, while Interstate 75 roars overhead along roughly the same corridor where the eastern leg of the subway was meant to run. Cincinnati's residents voted decisively for public transit. They built most of it. Then they walked away and chose highways instead. New York tells a similar tale, though on a vastly grander and more glamorous scale. When the Interborough Rapid Transit (IRT) subway opened on October 27, 1904, its showpiece was City Hall Station, the southern terminus of the first line. Architects George Hines and Christopher Grant Lafarge designed it as a statement. New York had arrived as a global metropolis. The station featured soaring Guastavino-tiled vaulted ceilings, the same technique used in Grand Central Terminal, brass chandeliers, ornate skylights that brought natural light to the platform, and ceramic tiles in rich reds, greens, and creams. Contemporary accounts describe a fountain with live goldfish, oriental rugs on the floor, paintings on the walls, even a live pianist during peak hours. This was public infrastructure conceived with the grandeur usually reserved for cathedrals or opera houses. City Hall Station closed permanently on December 31, 1945. The official reason was practical. The platform sat on a very tight curve, only about 200 feet long. The original 5-car trains had doors only at the ends, where the curve was least severe. As trains lengthened to 6, 8, and eventually 10 cars, the gap between train doors and the curved platform grew dangerously wide. Passengers risked falling onto the tracks. Rather than rebuild or straighten the curve, the city simply shuttered the station. Yet City Hall still exists. The 6 train uses the loop tracks there to turn around at the end of its downtown run. If a rider stays aboard past Brooklyn Bridge, technically against the rules, the train slowly passes through the abandoned station. For a few magical seconds, passengers can glimpse the Guastavino vaults, the hanging chandeliers, the untouched tile work, frozen in 1904 elegance, before the train curves back into the modern system. The New York Transit Museum occasionally offers hard-to-get tours for members. The skylights that once illuminated the platform still exist in City Hall Park above, now covered with concrete. America's most beautiful subway station sits preserved yet inaccessible, a ghost embedded in the living network. Other abandoned New York stations include Worth Street, closed 1962, South 4th Street in Williamsburg, construction started 1929, abandoned during the Depression, never opened, and even the short-lived Beach Pneumatic Transit of 1870 to 1873, a single-block experimental tube railway powered by air pressure that carried nearly 500,000 passengers before being sealed and forgotten, rediscovered accidentally decades later during unrelated digging. The pattern repeats across cities and eras. Build something ambitious and beautiful, then abandon it, seal it, and act as though it never existed. Los Angeles adds yet another dimension. Most people today associate LA with freeways and car culture, but that shift only solidified after World War II. Before the 1950s, Los Angeles boasted one of the world's largest and most efficient electric railway networks. The Pacific Electric Red Cars reached far across the basin. Part of that system ran underground. The Hollywood Subway, also called the Belmont Tunnel, opened December 1, 1925. Running 4,325 feet beneath downtown, it shaved about 15 minutes off trips to Hollywood, Glendale, and beyond. The subway operated successfully for 3 decades before being dismantled in the 1950s amid the post-war freeway boom and the deliberate dismantling of streetcar systems, famously influenced by General Motors and Firestone interests, though that's a larger story. The tunnels still exist, along with roughly 11 miles of other underground passages beneath downtown LA. During Prohibition, these tunnels reportedly connected an estimated 400 speakeasies, allowing patrons to move discreetly between illegal bars without stepping onto the street where vice squads might be watching. Places like the King Eddie Saloon, operating as a front piano store, and Cole's French Dip used basement connections to the network. Some local historians claim even City Hall officials were complicit in managing bootleg supply lines. Today most of these passages are sealed or restricted. A few can be visited through private tours or government buildings with special permission. Incomplete later projects, like the Bunker Hill People Mover Tunnel begun in the late 1970s and cancelled under the Reagan administration in 1981, left still more abandoned underground infrastructure. So why do American cities keep burying pieces of themselves? The official answers are always practical and site-specific. Devastating fires, chronic flooding, skyrocketing costs, political infighting, changing technology, the irresistible rise of the private automobile. Each explanation holds up when viewed in isolation. But when viewed together, across Seattle, Portland, Cincinnati, New York, Los Angeles, and dozens of smaller cities, the pattern suggests something broader. A systematic reorientation of American urban life between roughly 1890 and 1950. Public, shared, communal spaces gave way to private, individualized ones. Connected mass transit networks were replaced by divided highways. Underground infrastructure that once linked communities vertically and horizontally was sealed in favor of surface-level systems that often isolated them. I'm not alleging a single grand conspiracy. I'm simply observing a remarkably consistent direction of change. Downward, out of sight, out of active memory. The most unsettling aspect isn't the burial itself. It's the speed with which these places were forgotten. Seattle's underground thrived openly for less than 20 years before being condemned. Cincinnati's subway was abandoned before it ever carried a paying passenger. New York City Hall Station served the public for just 41 years. These are not ancient Roman ruins or medieval catacombs. They are artifacts from within living memory, or very close to it, now treated as quirky historical footnotes rather than vital parts of our built environment. What else are we walking over without realizing? What other layers of infrastructure, ambition, and everyday life lie sealed beneath the cities we think we know? And if entire urban chapters can vanish from collective awareness within a single century, what else have we been conditioned, intentionally or not, to stop seeing? The underground cities are still there. You can take a guided tour through parts of Seattle's passages. You can catch a fleeting glimpse of City Hall Station by lingering on a 6 train past Brooklyn Bridge. You can find photographs and videos of Cincinnati's pristine, empty platforms still waiting for trains that will never arrive. The evidence exists for anyone willing to pause and look downward instead of always forward. But looking requires accepting an uncomfortable truth. The surface we live on is never the complete story. What we see is only the latest iteration, constructed directly atop earlier versions that persist. Silent, dark, sealed but not erased. That realization connects to a larger set of questions I've been exploring. The quality of construction in these buried spaces, the architectural beauty, the engineering care, the evident pride, belongs to an era that viewed public infrastructure as something almost sacred. Then we abandoned it. We chose highways over subways, surface sprawl over vertical connection, forgetting over preservation. Why bury magnificence? What does it reveal about a society that repeatedly builds something extraordinary underground, only to walk away and pretend it never mattered? Those are the questions that keep me digging, figuratively and sometimes literally. And I suspect the answers lie not just in engineering reports or city council minutes, but in the deeper cultural, economic, and political transformations happening during the very decades when these underground worlds were being created, and then deliberately sealed away. Thanks for watching for video.